What percentage do you think of Muslims in the West are scary?
Yeah. Really high, Andrew. Well, they already want me dead. I'm over the fear. I'm so sick and tired of being silenced for so long that I don't care. The truth is that even if you have a buddy that you work with or that you go to school with, who is a great person, kind, generous, fun-loving, that person more likely than not holds very deeply scary anti-Semitic, homophobic, anti-women views. But as soon as you start to criticize Islam, it's like, oh my gosh, you're being racist, you're xenophobic, you're Islamophobic. Well, that's by design. That's to keep you quiet. In Iran, if you criticize Islam, you are going to be hanging from a crane the next day, right? But they can't do that in the West. So how are we going to stop people from criticizing Islam? We'll find a way to do that, and that's what they found. And it works perfectly, unfortunately, because there's a lot of useful idiots out there.
Is there something inherent to the text that is different than to Jewish text, Christian text?
72 virgins. Well, I think that the inherent difference is Islam really teaches.
What percentage do you think of Muslims in the West are ideologically captured?
Oh, that's a complicated question. When you ask ideologically captured, that's what makes it complicated.
What I'm interested in here is I come from a Jewish background, but secular, atheist. I don't remember ever hearing the word God in my life, even though we went to synagogue once or twice a year and there were bar mitzvahs, but it was a cultural thing. I didn't, and I've got a friend who seemed to be the same, but Muslim. And we lived in a different country. We were in Argentina. We were both living there. And I came to realize he had several editions of the Quran that he'd brought to Argentina, and that also he wasn't drinking alcohol. And there were quite a few things. And gradually there became too many differences between us, and we sort of drifted. Not because I was Jewish, but I think because I was an atheist. And that got me thinking, how common is it with Muslims in general for them to be religious and potentially, because I'm an atheist speaking here, scary?
Yeah. Really high, Andrew. Yeah, higher than either one of us want to admit. So the truth is that even if you have a buddy that you work with or that you go to school with, who is a great person, kind, generous, fun-loving, that person more likely than not holds very deeply scary anti-Semitic, homophobic, anti-women views. They may not show up right away, but they're there because this person most likely grew up in a environment, socialized in an environment that encouraged these things, not even really encouraged them, but like normalize them to the extent that to not be this is just unheard of. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that person may not necessarily want to push those views on others. If we're asking the percentage of the people that would try to push this hate into the public sphere, into policy, into government, into media, into law enforcement, stuff like that, then thankfully it's a lower number. So it's that's what we're dealing with.
Okay.
Most Muslims are just like I was, just raised in normalized anti-Semitism, for example, to the point that you don't even know that that's a bad thing. Because it's just, well, obviously this is the way it is. And so you have to go through this really difficult process of, first of all, acknowledging that you carry this irrational hate in you, forgiving yourself for being indoctrinated into it and carrying it, And then you can start the process of deprogramming and cleansing it out of you. That's a long process that takes many years. And it's not one that you can do when you're surrounded. And I mean surrounded like a school of fish with everybody being anti-Semitic. Now, that's just one example of the hate, but there's lots more.
I suppose the views towards women is another one. Well, there are Jews like that. I've grown up around some Jewish people like that, particularly at the conservative end and the Orthodox end and the Hasidic end. I'm not criticizing. I get attacked for criticizing all Hasidic communities, but there is that. It does exist there. There are Christians like that as well, but it feels like not to the same extent.
You're correct.
Why is that?
Well, I think the main reason is because there is a separation of church and state. So when you talk about Christians, they're not being forced into it, like they're not being indoctrinated into it, like their education, their media, their government, like everything. So when you look at a Muslim majority country, it's everywhere. These ideas are everywhere. So for you to think even that another narrative exists, first and foremost, is you'd have to be, you're an anomaly, but that's not the same for Christian majority countries. You're not hearing this. You're not getting these fundamentalist, extremist, evangelical views. You're not getting them in the mainstream. The Westboro Baptist Church isn't running schools. And it's the same for the Jewish community. Like, yeah, there's going to be small groups, in I completely forgot the name of the area in Brooklyn.
Monsey.
Well, there's that too, but I was thinking of the one that starts with a J, I think. But anyway, there's small pockets, there's small areas. But, look at Israel, which is the only Jewish majority country. 20% of the inhabitants are Arabs. You know what I mean? Like, there's not a overarching normalizing of hating the other in the way that there is in Muslim societies, Muslim countries, Muslim schools. Now, I was born and raised in Canada, but I went to Islamic schools. I went to the mosque every Friday. So you live in kind of like this little Sharia bubble, little separatist bubble. And you can speak to people from Scotland, from America, from, Sweden, France. They'll tell you the same story. It's the same thing. Even though you're living in a free secular country, you're like in this bubble of Islamic law. So that's all we hear. That's all we see. That's all we know. And, when you're living in a free country, you're getting all sorts of different narratives, all sorts of different ideas. You're being encouraged to think critically. You're reading stories. You're reading more than one book,
Yeah.
So you really, there's no comparison to the way Christians or Jewish people are today compared to the way Muslim people are today. If you're going to look at Christians a few hundred years ago, yes, we can start making comparisons. But the way it is today, there's no comparison. There's no Christian country that's killing people for being gay, that's putting women in prison for not dressing a certain way. You know what I mean? Like all sorts of these Islamic laws that are out there that are persecuting people daily, that are forcing people to conform and forcing people to follow this ideology because what's the alternative? Death? They're going to persecute you and your family. They're not going to just stop at you either. They will continue on with the rest of your family. So the risk is too high. So people just conform.
Sam Harris obviously famously called Islam the motherlode of bad ideas. Is there something inherent to the text that is different than to Jewish texts, Christian texts? Or is it, as you said, well, no, it's society that's moved a few hundred years later and this could have happened with any religion?
Well, I think that the inherent difference is Islam really teaches that you need, as a believing Muslim, it is your duty to spread Islam through any means necessary. And we can see that. We can see how Islam started on this little peninsula, and then it just grew, right? It just spread, and it's continuing to spread. And their hope is to spread further. And so that's really the way that that's done in such a pervasive way. Now it's pervasive. In the past, it was very upright. It was like a sword, you're going to convert or you're going to die. Those are your options. But now it's more subversive, but it's that same idea of like, it's this supremacist attitude of, if you're not a Muslim, then you are an other and you are beneath the rest of Muslims. And in order to elevate yourself, you need to become a Muslim. In order to stay alive in some cases, you need to become a Muslim. Now, Christians are missionaries and they spread their word. They do the same thing, except they're not using violence anymore. But, just yesterday, I saw the most horrible video from Nigeria where a mob of Muslim men attacked a Christian man, and they had machetes and they hacked this poor man's head off. I didn't watch that part of the video because he's Christian. So that kind of hate of the other that is so vicious, so violent, unfortunately, you're only seeing that with Islamic extremists. Obviously, October 7th is another prime example of that.
What is Islam? And I compare it to Judaism again. Okay, so I'm an atheist, but I'm Jewish culturally, and I think ethnically, because my heritage said 95% Ashkenazi Jewish. And the reason I ask as well is because there's this idea that if you criticize Islam, you're being racist. I want people to be able to criticize the Jewish belief without saying things about our noses and money and things like that. Where do you stand on all that? What is Islam?
So you said so many things that I want to respond to there. So yes, first and foremost, that term Islamophobia, that was created by Iran. So that was created with the aim of suppressing criticism of the religion. And so we criticize everything all the time. We criticize Republicans, we criticize communists, we criticize Judaism, we criticize Christianity. That's fine. But as soon as you start to criticize Islam, it's like, oh my gosh, you're being racist, you're xenophobic, you're Islamophobic. Well, that's by design. That's to keep you quiet. That's a bottom-up blasphemy laws, right?
They're using a Western woke, to use a lack of a better term, philosophy. Absolutely.
Which is, again, by design.
Smart.
It's very smart. And it works. In Iran, if you criticize Islam, you are going to be hanging from a crane the next day, right? But they can't do that in the West. So how are we going to stop people from criticizing Islam? We'll find a way to do that, and that's what they found. And it works perfectly, unfortunately, because there's a lot of useful idiots out there. And so it doesn't even have to be Muslims themselves that are suppressing criticism of the religion anymore, because we've got all of these dumb kids doing that for them.
So then Muslim is it simply a belief? Is an atheist Muslim just an atheist?
Well, it doesn't work that way. See, because you, as a Jewish person, you can say, I'm ethnically Jewish, but I don't follow, I don't eat kosher. You know what I mean? I don't observe Shabbat. You can do that. You can't do that as a Muslim. You don't have that luxury. If you don't follow the religion, then you are to be killed. Like, you don't count anymore. And when I say to be killed, I don't mean by random strangers. I mean by your family, because that's the term honor killing, honor violence. It's to retain the honor of the family. You have dishonored the family by not believing in Allah. And so now they feel that they need to get rid of you in order to atone for, sort of like the way my mom said it to me was, if I have a child who is not a Muslim, if I've raised a child who's not a Muslim, then I'm the one who's going to spend all of eternity in hell because I brought you into this world. And I'm not going to let that happen. So you need to be killed so that she can protect herself. That's how they see it.
Wow. Okay. That's a lot of pressure for her.
It is a lot of pressure for her. And I knew that was going to be her answer. It still, of course, made me sad. But it's so logical, like it's so rational. I don't know if logical and rational are the right words, but when you're indoctrinated, everything is so simple. Everything is so black and white. You never have to use your brain. And when I mean that, I mean that. I mean, you wake up in the morning, you get told how to put your clothes on, how to put your shoes on, how to go to the bathroom, how to drink water, how to cut your nails. Like there's no opportunity to think ever. And so it's like she just did the calculation, like, oh, you took off your hijab. So the next step is you're going to leave the religion. So I need to make sure that you're killed before you take that step.
Wow.
It was kind of like it was like she's compelled to do it.
Does it amaze you how humans are sort of like robots in that sense? And I've seen it in Hasidic Judaism. I talk about that a lot just because it's what I know in Hasidic Judaism a lot as well. It's like almost obsessive compulsive disorder. Like all these rules tell you what to do, and you just humans can just be led in that way.
I was one of those. It's so terrifying now to think back, and I try so hard to remember, what was I thinking? What was I feeling? But there's nothing there. You have to shut off your humanity.
Wow.
You have to shut off your morality, and you have to just follow. You have to just do what needs to be done. So in Islam, they describe it as as-sirat al-mustaqim, and when they paint the picture for you, like in Iran, they'll have big billboards with this on it, which it's a tightrope. And underneath the tightrope are the fires of hell. And Muslims are told you have to walk this tightrope so carefully. And if you just misstep, in you go. And by misstep, I mean miss a prayer, or your hair is showing from your hijab, like the tiniest little misstep. So the anxiety that causes, the pressure that you're under constantly is just unbelievable. And that's why you are so nervous to think, because you just need to follow one step in front of the other, one foot, and you just do what needs to be done. And that's how you stay alive. That's how you stay safe.
My friend Aaron Smith-Levin is a former Scientologist, and he said that when he was in the cult, there is literally nothing that anyone could have said to him that would have made him not believe in Lord Xenu and the aliens and all that mad stuff. Do you relate to that when you were younger?
I think that I was too terrified to even consider thinking, not believing, but even contemplating the belief system, criticizing it. Because I was taught that Allah can read my mind. He knows my intentions. He knows what I'm thinking. He knows what I'm feeling. So I was too scared to even think something that was against the rules.
Did you have an image of Allah in your mind, like how he looked?
Yes. And he didn't look too different from, it was always very scary. It was always very scary to me. The Christian God is always depicted as like, this gentle, loving, kind guy with a big white beard or whatever, similar to Santa Claus even. Not the Muslim Allah is not like that at all. If you read the Quran, it's very fire and brimstone. It's very, very scary. So I was terrified of him, terrified. And on earth, I'm terrified of my mom. I'm terrified of her husband. I'm terrified of the physical punishments. if I miss a prayer or if I don't memorize Quran or if I'm not dressed properly or all of the different, religious edicts that I was forced to follow. But I was also terrified of dying. I was terrified of dying before I was sure that I was going to avoid hell. It's not that you really want to go to heaven, because Islam doesn't really entice you. It doesn't entice women.
Yeah.
With heaven too much. It's just not hell, basically.
God.
Yeah.
For the men, it's how many virgins?
72 virgins.
It's just a lot. It's a big number as well. Who came up with that number?
It's insanity. It's absolute insanity. And when they go into detail, it's literally like Allah is a pimp. And he's like, come to this brothel. And he describes them. Breasts like pomegranates. Skin so white you can see their veins, their eyes are so black, this and that, like describing even like getting into like really, uncomfortable descriptions of like their bodily fluids and things like that. Like it's really obscene. It's absolutely obscene. But this is what's going to entice some young man full of testosterone where all the women are covered in black. And this guy is like desperate to touch a woman. So they tell him, hey, if you blow yourself up, you can get 72 of them.
Wow.
And so it works like a charm for complete idiots.
I've got to say, since I knew of you, I've been amazed by you because you're so courageous. And I mean, you know better than anyone that I think nowadays you can criticize Islam. You will be attacked by some of the left and some Muslim people, but I think you're going to be okay roughly until you start saying things about Allah, Muhammad. I read the satanic verses, and that's where I personally won't do it. I'm scared out of my mind. Mm-hmm. And I gather as well that being an ex-Muslim, that also puts you top of that list. How do you deal with this?
Well, they already want me dead. Once you leave the religion, you have 3 days to repent. And if you don't repent in those 3 days, then you're to be killed. So if I was in a Muslim majority country, obviously I would have been dead already. But look at Salman Rushdie. Look at Ayaan Hirsi Ali. Look at all these other public people who left the religion. Their lives are in danger, right? People have been killed over it. So, but even in the West, you're not safe. But this, I'll tell you what it's like, Andrew. It's like if you look at Iran, look at the women of Iran and how recently, after 40 years under the Islamic regime, they started burning their hijabs in the streets, And the IRGC are standing there with their huge guns and the women are like, watch this, burning it. You get to a point where the rage, it supersedes the fear. Of course, we're all scared, but I'm so much more angry than I am afraid anymore. I'm over it. I'm over the fear. I'm so sick and tired of being silenced for so long that I don't care. I don't care. Do what you want to do. I'm still going to talk because I understand what it means to be controlled by fear. And I know that that's all they have and that's all they've ever had. And to go back to Salman Rushdie, he had an interview once where he said, they asked him how he lives, how he deals with this, how he survives. And he said, you have to just choose not to be afraid. You just have to make that choice. And he's absolutely correct, because if you let the fear consume you, then they win. Then they're controlling you. Then you're biting your tongue, and that's how they're able to succeed in so many countries around the world. And that's why they're able to keep families in line and keep brave, amazing people living in fear, Yeah.
I'm still in awe. I was rereading Hitch 22, Christopher Hitchens' book, and he spoke about people have always said to him, you're so courageous and brave. And he said what it really was he was in fear all the time, but he got himself into positions where it was scarier to stay where he was than to run, into the line of bullets or whatever. And I suppose metaphorically, that's where you're at now. Yeah, I get that. And then that's metaphorically, but literally I was in that position when I had my daughter. And, her father
when I learned that he was a terrorist, he was a member of Al-Qaeda, and I had to get her out, I didn't have a plan. I had no idea what I was going to do or how I was going to do it or how we were going to survive. But I just knew that I couldn't stay where I was. And so you just run forward and I hope for the best.
Take us back to your upbringing. I know you've told it several times, but people who are coming to this for the first time would want to know.
Well, I think honestly what saved me is that for the first 5 to 6 years of my life, my mom was not a practicing Muslim. She was just like totally normal, secular woman from Egypt. Egypt was a pretty secular country when she was growing up. I mean, the wedding photos of her and my dad, she's wearing like a short dress. Like, no, who wears a short wedding dress? She had like a mini dress. It was the 60s. She's got the beehive, the big fake lashes. She looked like a Bond girl, you know, and they had belly dancers at their wedding. So that's how she grew up. You know, that was her life. And then her and my dad met at university in Egypt and they got married and they moved to San Francisco. And they were just loving the peace, love, and hippie days there until my mom had my sister. And then she wanted more of a family atmosphere. And so they moved to Vancouver, Canada. And then their marriage fell apart. So by the time I was 2 years old, my dad wasn't living in our house anymore. But my mom was in Canada with 3 kids. So she's a single mom to 3 children, and she's feeling alone. She's feeling vulnerable. And so where does she go looking for community and support? The local mosque. Not that she's religious, not that she even prayed or wore hijab or knew the first thing about the religion, because she went to Catholic schools growing up. Yeah. She went to French schools. Her best friends were Christian. The religion meant nothing to her, but she was looking for community. And unfortunately, at that point, it was like early 80s when this whole idea of Islamists, you know, Islamism, political Islam, was just starting to take off. Now, of course, it's spread like a virus throughout the world, but at this time it was just starting. And so she caught it right at the beginning when she went to the mosque. And she met this Egyptian man there who was already married, already had 3 children, but took my mom on as his second wife. So in Islam, a man can have up to 4 wives. So my mom was wife number 2. So this guy entered our lives like a bomb. You know, suddenly my mom has to start covering her hair. He took her records. We always had music playing in the house. Well, this guy comes along and says, music is forbidden. Music is from the devil. Music is haram. So he took all of her records, Dolly Parton, Kenny Rogers, Hank Williams. She used to love listening to country music. And he broke them all. And he sat us down in front of him and he handed us her records. And he said, break these. I was like, I'm not going to break my mom's stuff. Like, what the? And I look at my mom and she's just like got her face looking down on the carpet. She's not even, I was shocked because if my brother walked into my room and started breaking my Barbies, you know, I'd be enraged, but she wasn't moving. And that was sort of like the moment I understood that this guy is in charge now and that my mom is just a submissive, you know, I don't know what happened to her. And that was it. Then it was like we were forced into hijab. I wasn't allowed to ride a bike anymore. I wasn't allowed to go swimming anymore. I wasn't allowed to have non-Muslim friends anymore. This is harsh. Like this is a 6-year-old girl suddenly being told your best friends, Chelsea and Lindsay, they used to walk because I was in an apartment building. I'd walk down the hall to their places and we'd play Barbies together. All of that was forbidden. No birthdays, like everything that was important to a kid was taken away. And so I hated him, of course. And I hated what he was doing to my mom. I hated that she was covering herself in this ugly gray cloth. Like I hated everything about this guy. But this is my life now. And we moved into his house, into his basement, to be precise. Started going to Islamic schools, and my whole life changed. And I was constantly resentful, constantly waiting for the day that my mom would go back to the way she was before. Snap out of it. You know, whatever it is that he's done to you, just go back to who you were. But she wouldn't. And he would beat us up like mercilessly. And she would just turn a blind eye. And no matter what he wanted to do, she never had a word to say about it. And I waited and I waited and I waited, but she wasn't going to come out of this, you know. I describe her as a born-again Muslim. I think that's the best way for people to get it.
The zeal of the converts.
Correct. And she would actually say that. She'd say, I have to make up for all those years that I was wearing a miniskirt. You know? So she has to like over Muslim to make up for that. So all of these, you know, some of your listeners might know these names like Sayyid al-Qutb, Hassan al-Banna, like all of these like Islamist military strategist, you know, kind of people. Not necessarily military as in weaponry, but like with spreading Islamism through, like you were saying, using woke methodology or using, you know, these different subversive methods, using secular laws against themselves and stuff like that. That's how these guys wanted to spread Islam.
They even got people like Edward Said, who I think was a very secular, great thinker, and gradually went that way.
Another one of her heroes.
Oh.
Yeah. So that was my childhood. All of these guys were the heroes of my childhood. These are the people that my mom just like hook, line, and sinker. Whoosh, she went right into that to the point that it started to not even be enough. And this is why she got me married off to an Al-Qaeda terrorist.
Did she know it was an Al-Qaeda?
Oh, she knew. Yeah. She felt that he was the most wonderful, most Muslim that you could possibly imagine, because he followed the religion. Like, she got to the point where even the Islamists weren't good enough because they were too weak.
Wow.
Yeah. Whereas the jihadis knew how to be strong Muslims. And so she'd say things like, she'd laugh at like Christians who say, they'll turn the other cheek. And she'll be like, good, it's easier to chop off your head.
Wow.
That's how she became. She went that far.
That's so difficult to understand, that your own mum's doing that and you're young and you're trying to deal with that. And now you're with an Al-Qaeda. These Al-Qaeda guys are terrorists. Do they ever switch off like from that?
No. I mean, he doesn't even switch off to the point that he was in prison for 15 years. And then when there was an Islamist president named Morsi in Egypt for a very short amount of time. But in that time, he let out of prison all of the political prisoners. So basically all of his people. And Assam was one of those people that was let out of prison. But what did he do? Immediately when he got out, and this was like 2018, immediately got arrested again in Malaysia for being part of a terrorist plot. One-track mind. His only goal was to die fi sabilillah, to die a martyr, to die in jihad, to die for Allah. That's all he wanted. He was petrified of dying in prison. You know, when he because Mubarak had tried to imprison him before, but he slithered away. And they, you know, anyway, they revoked his citizenship, and that's part of the reason how he ended up coming into Canada and getting refugee status, which is really embarrassing, but that's my country for you. So yeah, there was nothing he wanted more than to end up in heaven with the prophets up there on the highest level with his 72 virgins, you know, all of the things that he'd been promised. He just really, really wanted to get that prize.
And how old were you at this point? I mean, and how are you feeling as this young Canadian woman now with this guy? So at this point, I was 19 when I was pressured into the marriage with him. I was put into niqab early on. I mean, there's so much backstory to this, Andrew, and a lot of it probably in a nutshell, I'd say the quickest way I can describe to you how I got to that point was my overwhelming
desire to have my mom love me and be proud of me. That's all I wanted. And because I didn't have a father in my life, because they got divorced when I was very young, he remarried and had 3 new kids. And he wasn't part of our life. So all I had was my mom. And my mom, as I described to you, was basically like smoke and mirrors. She was a figment of a human, but she wasn't, you know what I mean? Like she was just his, she did whatever he said or whatever the ideology told her to do. Do you know what I mean? Like she was just she's a cyborg, you know?
Sounds like one of the sort of ghosts from the Studio Ghibli. Have you seen the Japanese cartoons, Spirited Away?
Yes.
She's sort of just hovering through life. Yeah.
Exactly like that. And because the only thing that for her that would appease her, that would make her proud of me, that would make her love me, is if I was as Muslim as she was. That's what she needed me to be, you know? And so that meant wearing niqab, like covering myself head to toe in black, marrying the man she's telling me to marry, stop questioning things, stop pushing back, stop. I've always been a really curious person. My sister is not. My sister's the total opposite of me. She's more like my mom. She's happy following, you know? Her and my mom, like they would find it joyful that there's only one book they need to read. Whereas I wanted to be in the library, you know, I wanted to read all of them, and they thought I was so weird. So I remind myself of Matilda. I watched the play Matilda with my daughter and I cried. I was like, that's me. Like I always felt like a fish out of water. I always felt like the black sheep of the family. And so what happened when around 19 is they had already tried to push me into a marriage with my cousin, and I already got out of that, but I was so exhausted at this point, and my mom was so disappointed in me. She was angry at me because I had gotten out of the marriage with my cousin, and now it's like the whole family knows that I like outsmarted her and that I wasn't listening to her and she wasn't able to control me. And so she was like peak anger at me. And I was peak exhaustion. And so it was like this perfect storm. And at 19 is when it all came to sort of that climax where she said, if you marry this man, then you will make me happy. And if you don't marry him, then you're no longer my daughter. And I don't want to know you. And you can't live in this house. And I don't even want you to come to my funeral. So it was that, but that constant pressure. It's not like we had one conversation, right? But yeah, I basically gave in. And I was like, maybe she'll finally love me. Maybe if I do everything she wants me to do, and I take it as far as it can possibly go, maybe I'll know what it feels like to be loved by my mom.
It's so human.
It didn't work. I did everything. I married the guy. 1 week into the marriage, he was the first time he beat me up because he came into the house and the curtains were open. We were living on the 17th floor. The curtains were open and he's like, don't you have any shame? Everybody can see you. And I said, who's everybody? People in helicopters? Seagulls? And then that's it. Because I was mouthy back at him. And I went to my mom and I said, look at these bruises, look at these cuts, look what he's done to me. Get me out of this marriage. You told me to marry him. Look what he's done to me. And she said, are you stupid? Do you not know your own religion? Have you not read Surah An-Nisa? That's his right to beat you if you disobey or if you show arrogance. So you were showing arrogance. And so it's his right to beat you. You are his. And I was like, I can't do this. I can't live like this. Your husband was beating me up my whole life. And now I'm going to marry this. You're making me marry this guy. Now he's going to beat me up. I can't live like this. Please let me out. And she said, and also it's only been a week. If you divorce him now, everybody in the community is going to say he divorced you because you're not a virgin. Now you have to remember, my mom at this point is like, she's a Sharia scholar. She's a student at Al-Azhar University, a master's student at Al-Azhar, and she's the head of the Islamic Studies department of the Islamic school. So she's like peak Muslim in the community. So she's horrified that he might spread the rumor, that people might start to assume if they got separated so quickly, it's because he discovered she wasn't a virgin. So she's like, so you have to stay for a little bit longer. And at this point, we're in my building going back. She's taking me back to the apartment. And we're in the elevator. And I was saying to her, fine, I'll stay a little bit longer so that you won't be shamed by people spreading rumors. But I'm not going to let him touch me in the meantime, because I'm not going to risk getting pregnant. And as the doors of the elevator were closing, she started to remind me of the hadith that says a woman can't say no to her husband. Because again, you're his property. So this woman just told me that I have to accept being beaten by him, and I have to accept being raped by him. And there's nothing that you can do, because this is the Almighty Allah. This is the creator of the universe, has sanctioned these things. So who do you think you are to try and change that or complain about that? You're nothing.
So what's going through your mind at that point? You're walking back into an apartment. I mean, women or anyone would do anything to get away from someone who is a potential offender in that sense, who's going to physically attack you and do that to you. And you're having to walk, not voluntarily, but, you're walking back into that apartment.
It was because I didn't want my mom to have to deal with any backlash in the community. The honor, it's all about fucking honor. They put the honor of the family. This is why they're called honor violence and honor killings, because the pressure that they put, it's the girls in the family that have to carry the honor, right? If the girls are dressed too Western, you know what I mean? Or that's the problem. It's, are you keeping the girls in your family in line? That's what distinguishes an honorable family from a dishonorable family, is how controlled are the women in your family? And so I didn't, it's really this is a real tribal mentality. And the honor of the family, it doesn't mean anything in the Western world anymore. But in the Arab world and in many Muslim majority countries, in the cultures there are still very much, the honor of the family is paramount. And it's the girls that have to carry that pressure. And I've been raised with this guilt my whole life, with this pressure my whole life, with this knowledge my whole life that I am the one who decides if this family is honorable or not. My actions will either bring honor or dishonor to my family. And so when she said to me, you have to stay with him and accept him beating you and accept him raping you, or you're going to bring dishonor to the family, that's what did it.
Isn't it amazing that we romanticize love, particularly maternal and paternal love, so much in movies and books and things like that? This expectation, love transcends all, love is more powerful than anything else. And all it seems to take is maybe communal monitoring, other people in the community, whether it's fundamentalist Islam, whether it's the Stasi, whether it's Scientology, whatever it might be, for all of that to just die away.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you brought up Scientology, and when I was watching the documentaries on Scientologists, it's that similar dynamic where you're not a family. You're not. There isn't love between father and son or mother and daughter. That doesn't exist. The love is for the religion, for the ideology, for, Xenu or Allah or whatever. That's where your loyalty lies. Your kid, if they don't have that same loyalty, then they're disposable. That familial love and connection, even between partners, between husband and wife, it doesn't matter. There's no loyalty to anyone except for Muhammad, Allah. You know what I mean? Like that's the only place where you would die for them, you would kill for them, but your family, yeah.
You know, something I didn't realize until recently, and I bet a lot of people watching didn't know this, is something you touched on earlier about this new form of political Islam that sort of started in the 80s. And again, as I said before, I've been rereading Hitch 22, and Hitchens is very much throughout his political life on the side of Palestine. And he talks about it as this very sort of secular, oppressed place. And only in the 80s, and this was part of his disagreements with Edward Said, because they were good friends and they started to fall apart, did this kind of militant political, this is a new thing, isn't it?
Yeah. So what I didn't mention is that my dad is from Gaza. So when he met my mom in Egypt in university, it's because at the time Gaza was under Egyptian rule. And so he was allowed to get free university education in Egypt, just like any other Egyptian citizen. He was allowed all the rights of citizenry except for citizenship. So yes, my father had the same, you know, he said the exact same thing. So when he was living in Gaza, whether it was under Egyptian rule, whether it was under Israeli rule, he was living in a secular, comfortable, you know, it was a place that had civil laws, you know, like they could breathe, they could work, they could love, they could play on the beach, they could live. And then what happened with Yasser Arafat is it all took a turn, because Yasser Arafat is exactly who we're talking about. He's along with these Islamists, right? And then it became all about Islam and spreading Islam and the caliphate and all that stuff. And it was no longer about the people, but it was about the ideology. And so that's how things turned. And that's how we now ended up with Hamas taking over in 2005. They're not a government. They're not leaders. They are a terrorist organization, you know, similar to what you see happening in Afghanistan. What are Taliban? Terrorists is what they are, you know? So yes, that country absolutely did take a very, not country, but that area of the world took a very horrible negative turn. And my dad was amongst the many people from that area that were like, you guys, stop. What are we doing? But the indoctrination, this is the thing, is not only is the indoctrination very, very successful because it's so easy, it's so black and white, it's so clean. You can see the indoctrination has spread even with people who didn't even have the seeds of Islam in them. So these are people like, when we're talking about Palestinians or people from Gaza, they already kind of have the seeds of Allah, Muhammad, whatever. They've got that in their brains. But look at Harvard University. Look at, you know, all over the West. Look at the people that were chanting "Gas the Jews" in front of the Sydney Opera House. Like, they don't even have that sort of, you know, seed of Islam. And they can still buy into the ideology really quickly because it's so simple. There's an oppressor and there's the oppressed. There's the victims and then there's the oppressors that are victimizing them. So once you have that simple framework that, you know, a 2-year-old could understand, then it's easy to get people to follow. So that's one part of it. And the other part of it is fear. So when Hamas took over, for example, even though at the time there's a lot of people that didn't like them, you know, it was pretty bloody the way they came in. But they're too scared to speak up against them. Why do you think the Iranians have been living under the Islamic regime for 40 years? Fear. They never liked them. You know, the Islamic regime came in with lies. Same thing. It was bloody when they came in, just like Hamas when they went into Gaza. It was a bloody coup. Same thing. People didn't like them, but it didn't matter because you're scared. These guys have guns. They have no moral compass. They don't care. If you speak up against them, not only will they kill you, but they will kill the rest of your family. They will make everybody suffer. And so it keeps everybody in line. And so you saw over the years, I think it was just a few times over Gaza's history, you had people protesting. And in one of those protests, it was called "We Want to Live," basically. And as my dad described it, it was hearkening back to those days of when people could just live. And unceremoniously, people were being beaten up in the streets, disappearing, imprisoned, killed. You know, you have to control any kind of dissent. Again, same kind of thing they do in Iran, mowing down 1,500 people in one day because they were protesting against the Islamic regime. Same thing that they do in Afghanistan. Same thing that they do in every one of these countries where it's a terrorist regime. They're no different than ISIS. People are familiar with ISIS. It's the exact same thing. That same black and white, you're with us or against us, you follow what we say or you're to be killed attitude.
Do you think they're like laughing when they see college students in the West calling for global intifada and things like that?
Yeah, you know, that's the thing. Is there's two main kinds of people. There's the Ghazans who are like my dad, who are really, really sad about what happened to their country or to their homeland. And they would feel nothing but anger to those kids chanting these things, because as they're chanting their BS rhyming slogans, it's the people in Gaza that are suffering. You know what I mean? These guys are going to go home to their iPhones and their Starbucks, but it's the people in Gaza that still have to suffer under Hamas.
Yeah. So
those people are really angry at the stupidity and how the stupidity is being spread like a virus, and how their voices are outnumbering and overpowering the voices of the people like my dad in Gaza. So that's very, very frustrating. And then there's the other group who are the Hamas supporters, who are probably who are the larger group, the ones who are looking at these guys, and of course they're laughing at them. I just saw a poster for strippers for Gaza. You know what I mean? You've got, they don't know anything. They don't know that they would be the first ones in line to be killed. But I'm just going to go back again to give you this little, history lesson of what happened in Iran when the Islamic regime was trying to take over. They linked hands with the socialists and the communists and everybody on the left the same way Hamas is doing it today.
Really?
Absolutely.
I had no idea.
Yeah. And do you want to know what happened after that? So they were like, yeah, guys, let's do this together. We'll be friends. Everything will be great. So they used them because they were useful idiots. But once they weren't useful anymore, they got rid of them.
Oh, my God. Reminds me a bit. Is there a similarity in Saddam Hussein I remember when he got in charge, and there was that famous horrible scene where he stands up and then he locks the doors and gets everyone one by one, like half the room, and just kills them all.
Absolutely. And that same story is just repeated all over the Muslim world. That's how they do things.
So scary. And that's the amazing thing, isn't it? Like, everyone grows up in the West, for example, with that cliche of history repeats itself. Mm-hmm. And we all know that. And for some reason, we're all sitting here just waiting for the Nazis to come back. Mm-hmm. Like, that's the one thing we're all just going, okay, well, got my eyes peeled.
Germany's okay.
Yeah, as long as Germany's all right. Then, nobody seems to be looking at the left at all. Mm-hmm. So people sometimes say to me, like, why aren't you looking at the right? And it's just like, well, that's obvious. You're all looking at the right.
Correct.
That's almost boring. And I agree when people say, like, the far right's very dangerous. Of course it is.
But you all know that.
Yeah, you don't need me to tell you that.
Yeah. And that's the frustration with coming from that area of the world, is all of this stuff is so obvious to me. I've seen it happen over and over again. And so when it happens in the West, it's like, oh, here they go again. These guys are professionals at it now. They've done it so many times. And when I say these guys, I'm talking about the Islamists. People are familiar with the Muslim Brotherhood. That's like the largest organization. But even they are not even that powerful anymore, because there's just, they've there's so many factions. There's so many little groups. They all have the exact same ideology and they're all following the exact same playbook. But when there's lots of little groups, then it's harder. You know, it's kind of like that game with the cup, you know, can you find the ball? And it's just like moving around. It's like, oh, these guys are humanitarians. And then you find out, oh no, the money is actually going to support jihadis. It's like, whoosh, okay, well now it's this group. You know what I mean? And it's this constant shift. And so they're harder to find. When it was Muslim Brotherhood and everybody knew them and everybody started to recognize them, it's like, oh, well, you've gotten too big now. So these groups are everywhere. And they are doing this. So they had a plan. It was called the 100-Year Plan. And they started that 100-year plan after the Ottoman Empire fell. So the Ottoman Empire fell in the 1920s. And at that point, they got together and they said, okay, guys, what are we going to do? How are we going to get back our caliphate? We can't do it the way we did it the first time around. You know, we can't do it via the sword. We have to find a better way of doing it. And so that's when they came up with this Islamist strategy, which is through using different methods. One of them is, no surprise, the wombs of the Muslim mothers. So if you have 4 wives, each one of them is making a baby every year, very soon you will end up with a Muslim majority, or at least a significant minority enough of Muslims in that area to have political sway. And when I say that area, I'm talking about the West. So the question now is, how do we spread into Europe? How do we spread into the West? They're already in the Middle East and North Africa. They're worried about how are we going to spread the ummah further. Yeah, it is terrifying. And it's very, very successful. It's been working like a charm. So they discovered this 100-year, the FBI discovered it. It was online. Everybody was talking about it for a while. And that's when it was connected to the Muslim Brotherhood. And that's when they started to get too big. But these guys are still out there. Hamas are following this. ISIS are following this. Al-Qaeda are following this. Boko Haram are following this. Al-Shabaab are following this. Hezbollah is following this. Iran is following this. They've all got the same idea, which is we need to spread the word of Allah. But they're all just, some of them are doing it in different ways. Some of them are doing it violently, and some are doing it the way I'm describing, through using these different subversive methods. So one of them is through getting the Islamic vote. Another way is obviously through immigration, towards the same end of having a significant Muslim minority or even a Muslim majority. And then a third way is using secular laws against itself. And that's one that people are starting to get familiar with.
That's infuriating.
That is so infuriating. And then free speech being one of those. We talked about the term Islamophobia. That's one way of doing that, right? So it's like, use this woke term. Well, it's not woke, but it's something that the wokes are going to be, feel connected to, like, oh yeah, xenophobia, Islamophobia, racism, that's bad. Let's all jump on that bandwagon and attack anybody that criticizes this religion, right? They'll eat that up. And so what they're doing essentially is they're suppressing free expression. They're suppressing freedom of speech. And they'll do that. Oh, what do you have? You have a freedom of religion? Oh, okay. Well, my kids are only going to go to school half day on Friday. I need a mosque being built at this train station, or a prayer room, or blah, blah, blah. Like, you know what I mean? Like, they'll use whatever inch they're given, and they will stretch it to make it a mile. So right now, what you've got going on here in the UK is you've got that teacher, Katharine
Birbalsingh.
That's right. Katharine Birbalsingh. And she's got an amazing school that's doing amazing work. It's winning all sorts of accolades.
Michaela school.
That's right. And what happened in that school was the kids took it upon themselves that they were going to start praying during the school day in groups. And when it started to become disruptive, the kids became violent. They were throwing things at the teachers. And so the administration stepped in. By things, I mean like bottles and chairs. Like it was pretty violent. So when the administration stepped in and they said, you know what, this is a secular space, a safe space for everybody. We've got Hindus, Christian, Jews, Muslims, everybody is here, and we're all going to learn together, and we're all going to work together and support each other, and we're not going to have specific religious prayers going on because that's separating the kids. And when she did that, or when the administration did that, she started getting attacked by the parents of one of the kids that said, you are infringing upon my religious freedom. You're infringing upon my religious rights. So that's a way of using secular laws. I want to spread this Islamist ideology. And if you don't let me, then you're infringing on my rights. And a good book to read on this topic is a person who's kind of veered off the path a little bit, but it's Maajid Nawaz. And he wrote a book called Radical. And he grew up in the UK and became a member of Hizb ut-Tahrir, which is another Islamist organization. And he talked about how they did this in universities. They would have posters of a woman in niqab holding like AK-47 or something. And it would say, it had some sort of statement about spreading Islam. And when he was pulled into the dean's office and said, what is this violent image you've got up here or something? He said, well, this is my religious right.
Wow.
And if you don't let me keep it up there, then you're being an Islamophobe.
You know what? Having Katharine Birbalsingh in the secular corner is no bad thing because she's badass. She's
I love her.
Oh my, she's not going to back down. She just absolutely will not.
No, she won't. You know why she won't? Because she comes from a Muslim background. She's like me. She gets it. She knows it. She understands it. She's not like, no offense to anybody listening, she's not a clueless Westerner who doesn't understand Islamists. She gets it. She knows this world. And so she understands what she's up against.
Absolutely. And also a way for people, if people are watching and they're feeling they want to fight back against this, firstly, share this video, but also where can they follow you and your book? Because we didn't go too much into your personal story. So tell us a little about your book and your channel and all of that.
So my book is called Unveiled: How Western Liberals Empower Radical Islam. And that book really is, it tells the story of my life. But through telling the story of my life, it's trying to illustrate to my fellow liberals how dangerous it is when they cover for extremists under the guise of being inclusive and diverse. And how just it's so dangerous. And so that's basically the main crux of the book. And I've got a podcast called the Yasmine Mohammed podcast, which can be found on wherever your podcasts are found, and it's on YouTube as well. And I've also got my organization, Free Hearts, Free Minds. And what that organization does is it supports people like myself who have renounced Islam. So when you leave the religion, when you choose to not be a part of it anymore, immediately your life is in danger. Immediately your family disowns you. It's a very scary, very traumatizing place to be for people around the world. Because now with the internet, with YouTube, with podcasts like yours, people are starting to get countering narratives. They're getting new information. They're reading Richard Dawkins. They're reading Christopher Hitchens. They're reading Sam Harris, and they're realizing it's like the Truman Show, They're like, whoa, I've been living a lie. But then where can they go? What can they do? They can't talk to each other because it's dangerous. So Free Hearts, Free Minds is a safe space where there's a community. We offer group support, individual support to get over the trauma, and then community support where we can support each other to be empowered to move on with our lives.
Who's a heretic you admire?
We mentioned Christopher Hitchens, and I don't know if there's anybody that could ever top him. But I never got to meet him. I never got to know him. And I wish I could have. But I think that up there with him is Sam Harris.
Beautiful. I think Hitchens might be mine actually as well. I've mentioned him enough times today, haven't I? People, please do follow Yasmine. We'll have all the links in the description and get her book. It really is wonderful. Share this. This message needs to get out there and keep watching this channel.